The morning sunlight slipped through the tall glass windows of the billionaire's mansion, painting soft golden patterns across the marble floors. Staff members moved quickly but quietly, preparing everything for what seemed like a normal day. But for one woman, this day carried a weight that none of them could see. She walked slowly through the long hallway, holding a small, worn-out handbag close to her chest. Her name was Maria, the maid who had worked inside this house for 20 years in complete silence. No complaints, no attention, and almost no one truly noticing her presence. Today was her last working day, though nobody yet understood how important her story really was. Maria had arrived at the mansion 2 decades earlier, when the billionaire boss was still building his business empire. Back then, the house was smaller, the staff was limited, and life inside the mansion felt less organized. She was hired as a simple housemaid, responsible for cleaning rooms, preparing guest spaces, and helping in the kitchen when needed. Over the years, as the boss's wealth and influence grew, the mansion expanded, the number of employees increased, and luxury became the new normal. Yet Maria remained exactly the same, quiet, loyal, and invisible to most people around her. The billionaire boss, Mr. Harrison, was known across the country as a powerful businessman with sharp decision-making skills. His schedule was packed with international meetings, business deals, and charity events. Inside the mansion, he was respected but distant. He trusted his managers, assistants, and security team to handle daily operations. Rarely did he notice the staff members who worked behind the scenes, making his life smooth and comfortable. Maria never expected recognition from him. She simply focused on doing her work perfectly, day after day, year after year. The other employees often wondered about Maria. She never joined staff gossip, never shared personal stories, and always left work quietly after finishing her duties. Some younger workers even joked that she spoke less than the house statues. But there was something about her calm presence that made senior staff trust her deeply. Whenever there was a crisis in the mansion, a missing item, an emergency guest visit, or sudden late-night preparations, Maria somehow managed to solve problems without drawing attention to herself. On her final morning, Maria followed her usual routine. She polished the master bedroom furniture carefully, adjusted the family photographs placed on the side tables, and paused slightly while looking at an old picture of Mr. Harrison holding a small child in his arms. Her eyes softened, as if the memory inside that photograph held a secret only she understood. She gently placed a frame back exactly where it belonged, making sure not a single fingerprint remained. Meanwhile, downstairs, the mansion buzzed with unusual activity. The boss had returned early from an overseas business trip. His assistant rushed to brief him about pending matters, while security staff updated him on household changes. During this conversation, a simple document was handed to him, a retirement file that required his signature. At first, it looked like just another routine staff clearance form. But as Mr. Harrison casually scanned the details, one line suddenly caught his attention. The name written on the file made him pause completely. It was Maria, and attached to the retirement record was a sealed envelope marked personal, to be opened by the boss only. Mr. Harrison stared at the sealed envelope for several seconds, his fingers resting on the edge of the retirement file. The office around him continued moving with its usual busy rhythm. His assistant kept explaining meeting schedules, upcoming business negotiations, and important calls waiting for him. But his attention had already drifted elsewhere. Maria's name echoed quietly in his mind. He tried to picture her face clearly, but all he could remember was a calm woman in a simple uniform, always lowering her eyes respectfully whenever he passed by. It bothered him that someone who had worked in his home for 20 years felt almost like a stranger. He slowly placed a file on his desk and asked his assistant a simple question about Maria. The assistant looked slightly confused and admitted that Maria had one of the cleanest employee records in the mansion's history. She had never taken extended leave, never requested salary increases, and had never been involved in staff complaints. Her attendance was nearly perfect, and senior supervisors had always rated her performance as exceptional. The assistant even mentioned that Maria often volunteered to cover shifts when other workers called in sick, especially during large family events and important gatherings hosted by Mr. Harrison. That information made Mr. Harrison lean back in his chair. He had built his business empire by studying numbers, performance reports, and employee records. But something about Maria's record felt unusual. 20 years without a single major request or personal demand felt almost impossible. Most employees, even the most loyal ones, asked for promotion, financial help, or time off during difficult moments in their lives. Yet Maria's file showed nothing but silent dedication. It made him wonder what kind of life she lived outside the mansion walls. Downstairs, Maria continued her duties, as if nothing had changed. She carefully organized the dining room silverware, ensuring each piece reflected the chandelier light perfectly. A few junior staff members whispered among themselves about her retirement. Some were surprised, while others seemed slightly emotional, realizing that a familiar face they had grown used to would no longer be part of their daily routine. One of the younger maids approached Maria and asked softly why she never talked about her family or personal life. Maria only smiled gently and said that sometimes silence helps people stay strong. As the afternoon approached, Mr. Harrison finally picked up the sealed envelope again. The handwriting on the front looked old-fashioned and slightly shaky, as if written with great care. He noticed the date written in the corner. It was from several years ago, not recent. That detail made his curiosity grow stronger. Why would Maria prepare a personal letter years before her retirement? And why was it meant only for him? Before opening it, he called the mansion's senior house manager and asked about Maria's early years of service. The manager, who had worked in the mansion almost as long as Maria, paused before answering. He explained that Maria joined during a very difficult time in the Harrison household, back when the boss's family was facing a private crisis that few people outside the mansion ever knew about. The manager stopped mid-sentence, almost as if he realized he had said too much, and quickly changed the subject. That unfinished statement made the air in Mr. Harrison's office feel heavier. He looked once more at the envelope, noticing that the paper edges had slightly faded with time, like it had been carefully protected for years. At the same moment, downstairs, Maria removed her staff badge and placed it inside her small handbag. She glanced around the mansion one last time, her eyes lingering on the staircase and family portraits, as if quietly saying goodbye to memories no one else could see. Upstairs, Mr. Harrison finally slid his finger under the envelope seal, unaware that whatever waited inside might change everything he believed about loyalty, sacrifice, and the hidden history of his own home. The paper inside the envelope felt fragile as Mr. Harrison unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, but clearly written with effort. Each word placed with deep thought. The first line immediately made his chest tighten. Maria had not written the letter as an employee. She had written it as someone who had quietly witnessed the most painful chapter of his family's life. As he continued reading, his office suddenly felt too small, too silent, as memories he had buried under years of business success slowly began to resurface. The letter spoke about a time 20 years ago when the Harrison family faced a sudden personal crisis involving his young son, Daniel. Mr. Harrison's mind flashed back to those days, long hospital visits, confusing medical reports, and the fear that hung over his family like a dark cloud. His business was just starting to grow at that time, and he remembered feeling torn between saving his company from collapse and staying beside his family. The letter hinted that during those difficult months, someone inside the mansion had taken on responsibilities far beyond their job description, quietly supporting the household when his wife was emotionally overwhelmed and the staff struggled to manage daily life. Mr. Harrison paused reading and stared at the floor. He remembered how fragile his wife had been during Daniel's illness. She had rarely left her son's side. The mansion operations had been chaotic, and he relied heavily on his senior staff to maintain order. But he never truly asked who handled the emotional side of those days, who comforted his frightened child when his parents were pulled in different directions by fear and pressure. Downstairs, Maria slowly packed the last of her personal belongings from the small staff locker she had used for 2 decades. Inside were only a few simple items: an old scarf, a small notebook, and a faded photograph that she carefully slipped into her handbag. One of the kitchen workers watched her quietly, sensing there was a story behind Maria's calm expression. The worker gently asked where Maria planned to go after retirement. Maria smiled softly and said she had a place waiting for her, though her voice carried a hint of uncertainty, as if she wasn't fully sure what that next chapter would look like. Back in the office, Mr. Harrison continued reading. The letter described moments he had completely forgotten or never even knew had happened. It spoke about long nights when Daniel would wake up frightened after medical treatments, calling for his parents who were often meeting doctors or handling urgent matters. Maria wrote about how she would sit beside the child, telling him simple bedtime stories, holding his hand until he fell asleep. She mentioned how she never told anyone because she believed her duty was to keep the household stable, not to seek recognition. As Mr. Harrison read further, another detail caught his attention. The letter suggested that Maria had made a personal sacrifice during those same months, something connected to her own family. But the explanation stopped suddenly, as if she had intentionally left part of the truth unspoken. That missing piece created a deeper tension in his mind. He realized he knew absolutely nothing about Maria's personal life, despite her being present during one of the most fragile periods of his family's history. At the same time, the senior house manager stood outside the office door, debating whether he should reveal more about the past. He remembered events that had been quietly kept away from Mr. Harrison to protect him during his business struggles. The manager knew that if those details came out now, they could change how the boss viewed not only Maria, but also the decisions made by several trusted staff members years ago. Meanwhile, Maria stepped outside the mansion gates, holding her handbag tightly as she paused for a final look at the place that had shaped 20 years of her life. Inside the office, Mr. Harrison reached the final paragraph of the letter, where Maria mentioned that her greatest sacrifice was something she never wanted gratitude for, only understanding. But before she explained what that sacrifice truly was, the letter ended with a single unfinished sentence that left him staring in shock, realizing that the truth he was about to uncover might carry consequences far beyond a simple farewell. Mr. Harrison read the unfinished sentence again and again, hoping the missing words would somehow appear if he stared long enough. His hands felt unusually unsteady as he placed the letter back on the desk. The quiet office suddenly felt filled with questions he had never thought to ask. The letter had revealed pieces of a hidden past, but the most important truth remained locked between the lines Maria had never completed. His heart pounded with a strange mix of guilt, curiosity, and fear about what her real sacrifice could have been. He immediately pressed the intercom and asked the senior house manager to come inside. When the manager entered, his expression already carried the weight of someone who knew this moment was coming. Mr. Harrison held up the letter silently, watching the manager's face carefully. The manager's eyes lowered for a moment before he admitted that there were things from 20 years ago that the household had promised to keep quiet. He explained that during Daniel's illness, emotions inside the mansion were fragile, and many decisions were made quickly just to protect the family from further stress. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his voice calm but firm, asking what kind of decisions required such secrecy. The manager hesitated, clearly struggling between loyalty to the past and honesty in the present. He mentioned that Maria was not just helping with household duties during Daniel's medical treatments. She had taken on responsibilities that even trained caregivers struggled to handle. She stayed awake for nights, managed emergency situations when Daniel's condition suddenly worsened, and supported Mrs. Harrison during moments when fear almost broke her strength. But even as the manager spoke, it was clear that he was still holding back something deeper. At that same moment, security cameras at the mansion gates showed Maria slowly walking down the long driveway toward the main road. Her steps were steady but slow, as if every step carried memories she was leaving behind. A junior security guard noticed her leaving alone and informed the control room, unsure whether this was part of her official retirement or something more emotional. The message was quickly passed upstairs, reaching Mr. Harrison just as he stood from his chair, feeling a growing urgency he could not explain. Meanwhile, the manager finally revealed that Maria's personal life had been affected during those difficult months. He spoke carefully, choosing his words as if each sentence carried emotional weight. He hinted that Maria had faced a family crisis of her own while continuing to serve the Harrison household without interruption. There were days, he said, when she received distressing news from outside, but still returned to work the very next morning, refusing to let her struggles disturb the family she served. However, before he could explain further, he stopped himself, almost as if he feared crossing a line that had been protected for decades. Mr. Harrison's frustration grew. He grabbed the letter again, searching for hidden clues he might have missed. The faded paper suddenly felt heavier in his hands, as if it carried years of silence pressing down on him. He began connecting memories, brief moments when he had seen Maria accompanying Daniel, times when his wife had mentioned an unnamed staff member who gave her strength, and nights when the mansion functioned smoothly despite the emotional storm surrounding his family. Outside the mansion gates, Maria reached the edge of the property and paused beside the tall iron fence. She took out the faded photograph from her handbag and stared at it for several seconds. Her eyes filled with emotion, but she quickly composed herself, as if she had practiced hiding those feelings for years. A car slowly approached from down the road, its arrival unexpected and unannounced, making her freeze in place. Inside the mansion, Mr. Harrison suddenly realized that if Maria left without answering the unfinished truth in that letter, he might never understand the full story of the woman who had silently shaped one of the most critical chapters of his family's life. Without another word, he rushed toward the hallway, unaware that the next few moments could reveal a truth powerful enough to change how he viewed loyalty, family, and sacrifice forever. Mr. Harrison moved quickly through the mansion hallway, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors as staff members stepped aside, surprised by the urgency in his expression. He had not rushed like this in years. His mind replayed every line of Maria's letter, every hint the house manager had carefully avoided explaining. As he approached the front entrance, his assistant called out, reminding him about an important business call waiting on hold, but he ignored it completely. For the first time in a long while, business success felt smaller than the truth he was chasing. Outside the mansion gates, Maria stood frozen as the unfamiliar car slowly stopped in front of her. The engine turned off, and for a few seconds, there was only silence between her and the closed car door. Her grip tightened around the faded photograph in her hand. When the door finally opened, a young man stepped out, dressed simply but carrying a serious expression. Maria's eyes widened slightly, revealing a rare crack in her calm composure. It was clear she recognized him. Yet her face also showed worry, as if his presence at this moment could reopen wounds she had spent years hiding. Back inside, Mr. Harrison reached the security control room just as the guards replayed the live camera footage. He saw Maria standing near the gate, facing the unknown visitor. Something about the scene made his chest tighten. He asked the security team to zoom in further. As the camera adjusted, the young man handed Maria a small envelope. The exchange looked emotional but controlled, like two people carrying a shared history that words could not easily explain. The senior house manager, who had followed Mr. Harrison into control room, suddenly stepped back after seeing the young man's face on the screen. His reaction did not go unnoticed. Mr. Harrison immediately demanded to know if the manager recognized him. The manager hesitated again, clearly battling years of silence. After a long pause, he admitted that the young man might be connected to the sacrifice Maria mentioned in her letter, but he insisted he did not know the full story himself. His uncertain answer only deepened the tension building inside the room. Outside the gates, the young man spoke softly to Maria. Though the cameras captured no sound, his serious gestures and Maria's emotional reaction made it clear the conversation carried heavy meaning. He pointed briefly toward the mansion, then toward the road behind him, as if urging her to make a difficult decision. Maria looked back at the mansion one more time, her eyes lingering on the tall windows where she had spent 20 years working quietly behind the scenes. Mr. Harrison felt a growing fear that the truth he was chasing might not only reveal Maria's sacrifice, but also expose something about his own family that he had never questioned. He remembered the manager's unfinished explanation about Maria's personal crisis during Daniel's illness. Suddenly, a disturbing thought crossed his mind. What if Maria's sacrifice was not only emotional or financial, but something deeply connected to Daniel's survival during those fragile months? The security team informed him that Maria had officially signed her exit clearance earlier that morning, meaning she had no obligation to stay or explain anything further. That realization hit him hard. If she left now, the truth behind 20 years of loyalty, hidden sacrifice, and silent service might disappear forever. At the mansion gates, Maria slowly accepted the envelope from the young man. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it and glanced at what was inside. Her face turned pale, and she quickly closed it again, pressing it tightly against her chest. The young man waited silently, watching her reaction, while a second car suddenly appeared down the road, approaching faster than expected. Inside the control room, Mr. Harrison leaned closer to the screen, sensing that whatever was about to happen outside those gates could uncover a truth far more complicated than he had prepared himself to face, and possibly reveal a connection between Maria, the mysterious visitor, and a secret from his family's past that had remained buried for 20 years. Mr. Harrison rushed out of the mansion, his breath heavy as he moved faster than he had in years. The cold afternoon air hit his face as he reached the driveway, his eyes locked on the mansion gates where Maria still stood between the two cars. The second vehicle had now stopped behind the young man's car, and two people stepped out, his wife, Mrs. Harrison, and their son Daniel. The moment felt unreal, as if 20 years of hidden truth had gathered in one single place. Maria stepped back slightly when she saw them approaching. Her eyes filled with emotion she could no longer hide. Daniel, now a grown young man, walked toward her slowly. His face carried confusion, but also a strange sense of recognition, as if memories buried deep in his childhood were trying to return. Mr. Harrison finally reached them, his voice trembling as he asked Maria to explain everything. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words. Before Maria could speak, Mrs. Harrison gently stepped forward. Tears rolled down her face as she admitted that the truth had been kept hidden not only from Mr. Harrison, but also from Daniel himself. She revealed that during Daniel's severe illness 20 years ago, doctors had struggled to find a compatible medical match for a critical treatment that saved his life. The family had been desperate, and time was running out. During that same period, Maria had quietly volunteered to help after learning she was the only suitable match. Mr. Harrison's heart pounded as he tried to process her words. Maria lowered her head, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Mrs. Harrison continued, explaining that Maria went through a painful and risky medical procedure without asking for payment recognition or even a permanent contract. She only made one request, that the family never treat her differently and never reveal her sacrifice to Daniel, because she wanted him to grow up without feeling he owed his life to anyone. Daniel stared at Maria, his eyes filling with shock and emotion. Pieces of forgotten memories began connecting. The comforting voice during hospital nights, the gentle hand that stayed beside him when his parents were pulled into medical discussions, the bedtime stories he had never known were told by her. His voice broke as he asked Maria why she never told him. Maria smiled softly and said that seeing him grow healthy and strong was enough reward for her. But before the emotional moment could settle, the young man who had arrived earlier stepped forward. Maria looked at him nervously, clearly fearing what he might reveal next. The young man introduced himself as her son, whom she had sent to live with relatives during Daniel's treatment because her recovery and work responsibilities made it impossible for her to care for him properly. He explained that while Maria was helping save another child's life, she had missed years of her own child's upbringing. The revelation hit everyone with unexpected force. Mr. Harrison realized Maria's sacrifice was even deeper than he imagined. She had not only risked her health, but had quietly given up precious time with her own family to protect his. Daniel stepped closer to Maria, his voice filled with gratitude and guilt, promising that her story would never remain hidden again. Just when it seemed the truth had fully surfaced, Maria gently handed Mr. Harrison the envelope the young man had given her. Inside was a medical report showing that Maria now needed long-term treatment due to complications that had slowly developed over the years, something she had never told anyone, fearing it might create sympathy or obligation. Mr. Harrison looked up at her, overwhelmed, realizing that even on her last day, Maria had planned to leave quietly without asking for help, carrying one final silent sacrifice that no one had been meant to discover. The silence at the mansion gates felt heavy as Mr. Harrison held the medical report in his trembling hands. For years, he had built his reputation as a powerful billionaire boss who solved impossible business problems. But at that moment, he felt completely unprepared to face the quiet strength standing in front of him. He looked at Maria, noticing how she stood calmly, almost relieved that the truth was finally out. His voice softened as he asked why she never came forward for help when her health started declining. Maria simply replied that she never wanted her sacrifice to become a burden for the family she had promised to protect. Mrs. Harrison stepped closer and gently held Maria's hands, tears flowing freely now. She admitted that keeping the secret for so long had been one of the hardest decisions of her life. She had respected Maria's wish for silence, but deep inside, she had always feared this exact moment, discovering that Maria had been quietly suffering alone. Daniel, still overwhelmed by emotion, spoke with determination. He told Maria that her sacrifice was not something that created debt, but something that built a bond stronger than words. He promised her that she would never have to face her medical challenges alone again. The young man, Maria's son, stood quietly beside her, his eyes filled with mixed emotions. He explained how he had spent years trying to understand why his mother had chosen to stay away while working inside the mansion. Over time, he realized she was protecting not only her job, but also a promise she believed was bigger than her personal life. Now, standing there together, he told her he was proud of her strength, even though he had missed her during his childhood. Maria held his hand tightly, as if trying to make up for lost years in one simple gesture. Mr. Harrison made a decision that surprised everyone standing there. He publicly thanked Maria, not as an employee, but as a guardian of his family's most fragile memories. He announced that her retirement would not mean distance from the Harrison family. Instead, he arranged for her complete medical care, ensured her son would receive support for his future plans, and offered Maria a permanent place within the family's charitable foundation that focused on helping workers who silently support households and businesses around the world. Weeks later, the mansion felt different. Staff members spoke more openly, appreciating the unseen sacrifices that often go unnoticed behind luxury and success. Daniel personally visited Maria during her treatment, rebuilding the bond that had once existed between them during his childhood illness. Mrs. Harrison often sat with Maria, sharing conversations that were delayed by 20 years of silence. Even the senior house manager admitted that the mansion felt lighter now that truth had replaced secrecy. Maria's story quietly spread to the foundation's work, becoming a reminder that loyalty, silent sacrifice, and human kindness often exist in places where people rarely look. Mr. Harrison himself began speaking publicly about valuing people beyond their job titles, reminding business leaders that true success is built on the unseen efforts of those who work without recognition. On a calm evening months later, Maria visited the mansion again, not as a maid, but as a respected guest. As she walked through the familiar hallway, sunlight once again reflected across the marble floors, just like it had on her last working day. This time, however, she was no longer invisible. She stood beside the family she had protected, knowing her years of silent dedication had finally been understood. And in that quiet moment, everyone present realized that sometimes the greatest sacrifices are not made loudly, but in silence, shaping lives in ways that are only understood when the truth finally finds its voice.